In this week's video, we're going to be looking at tips and techniques for post-processing work to help improve the final result of your image. Now, you may indeed know some of these techniques, you may indeed know all of them, one of them in particular you should know, but they may help you if you're just a beginner to photography and you don't have access to some plugins or other things, or you're just trying to find your way around Photoshop and Lightroom. You may find these very, very useful. So without further ado, I'll dive right in to the edits. Normally I'd start with number 1, which is calibration, but because I want to spend a little bit of time in that, I've left it till the end. So let's jump into number 2. Normally when you open an image from Lightroom into Photoshop, this is what you would normally do. You'd right click, edit in Photoshop, and that's it. And what happens when you do that is, if I click that here, you can notice that all my edits are here. So if I now go into Photoshop, and you can see the image there, and it's sitting here as well as a layer. Now if I go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, all my edits have been reset, and what's basically happened is I've edited in Lightroom and brought it into Photoshop as a layer. So the edits that I have made have been baked into that image. Now there's a way around this, and that's what I'm going to show you with this. So as you can see, I'm now back in Lightroom, and what I'm going to do is show you one way to still have control of all these edits. Now if I right click here, edit in Photoshop, and open as a smart object in Photoshop. And what that does is that sends that with all this information still live into Photoshop. So we're now back in Photoshop, and as you can see by the layer icon here, it's a smart object. So what I can do is double click on that, and you'll notice that all the edits that I made in Lightroom have came in with the image file, and I can still adjust them from here. For example, I could get into the color mixer and I could push the yellows, and I'm going to take them over that way slightly, and I'll push the saturation in them, and let's just play with the luminance, which is too much there, so let's reset the luminance there. But you can see that everything here is still completely and utterly editable. It's not baked into the image, and it is not re-editing an image that you have already set to how you like. So I'm going to click OK here, but before I do, I would like to show you this here, ProPhoto RGB 16-bit 240 ppi. That's how it's been set up for me for my editing workflow. So I'm going to click this, and this is what I recommend you do as well. This will also bypass Lightroom if you don't want to use Lightroom for whatever reason at all. Now you can go in and set up your own colour space or whatever. As you can see, mine's is sitting at ProPhoto RGB. 16-bit channel, you also have 8-bit or 16-bit. However, I would recommend you edit at 16-bit. Resolution, everything's there. This is what you should tick. Photoshop, tick that box, make sure that box is checked. And what that does is open in Photoshop as smart objects. Now what that will do is, if I click OK here, what that will actually do is, if I have a raw file that I want to open straight into Photoshop as a smart object, because I've checked that box, anything I open will come in as a smart object. And that's the same file on my desktop. I'm going to right click here, open with Photoshop 2021. And what that does is that opens up the camera raw filter for Photoshop, as you would expect. But what it does is it allows you to open it as an object once you've made your adjustments. Open it as an object, or if you click down here, you can open as a copy. Now if I open as an object, it will open it as a smart object, meaning I have access to adjust this at any point at all. If I open as a copy without any adjustments, I then have to go into the camera raw filter in Photoshop to edit it, but it has everything that I have done here or not done here baked in. So I'm going to open as an object, and you'll see that this will boot up, and there we have a smart object. I double click that with no edits because I didn't do any edits to it, but I can then work from there. So that's how you can set it up as a smart object, and that's why I would personally recommend using smart objects when you open in Photoshop. Although this was a finished image, I felt this image was quite flat to look at. There wasn't too much dimension in it. So what I did was I took it into Photoshop, open as a smart object in Photoshop. Now that we have this image in Photoshop as a colour image, now we can see depth in this, but we can't see it perfectly well. And as I say, I felt this image was still quite flat. So what I did is I added a black and white adjustment layer to it, which can be deleted later. But the reason I added that is it will allow me to see better with the contrast of the entire image. Now, if you have access to Lumensia or the TK panels or any other of these plugins, I would use them. But if you don't, this is the next solution that you could use. And what I'm going to do here is I am going to edit this image in black and white and then take it back to colour, because this way I can see the contrast in it. I can add more depth to the image. How I'm going to do that is by adding 2 more adjustment layers. The first of the adjustment layers is a curve layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the middle part here, just in the middle range, and bring it down to a value that I think is worth working with. And that is okay, perhaps too much. Maybe to about there. And I'm going to click in the mask. And for me, I'm on a PC, so I'm going to go Control and I and invert that mask. Above that, I'm going to create another adjustment layer, and again another curves, and this time I'm going to take the opposite way. I'm going to push that up slightly, which will brighten the image slightly. Now, I'm not playing with the lights or the darks here at all. I'm only sitting in the mid-range, and I'm going to go to about there. And again, Control and I clicked on the mask, and I'm going to hide that. Now, the next part of this process, I am going to darken certain areas because I've already applied that. So where I think this should be darker, and I've taken a brush, soft brush, my opacity is 12 and my flow is 60, and I have to paint in white because it's a black mask. So I'm going to take my brush size up here, and I am using a tablet to do this, so it will take a wee bit longer to do it, but what I'll do is I'll speed up the entire process. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm looking, and I'm painting quite liberally here just for the sake of this video. What I'm actually doing here is darkening down areas that I feel should be. Now, if I was to do this image precisely, I would be zoomed in and I would be taking my time with this, but for the purposes of the video, I am just going to paint over certain areas, and you'll see it beginning to appear down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that, and I'm going to paint in here, and then I'm going to turn the layer off just to show you, and then I'm going to go on and paint in the lighter areas. So I'll just jump to the lighter areas just to show you this slightly here. I'm not adjusting my brush, but it will just show you the difference before I speed up the entire video. So if I put the two of these in a group, holding down Shift, put them in a group, and I turn that group on and off, you can see the difference straight away. So what I'll do is I'll go on and I'll continue to paint this, and I'll speed up the video. Okay, so what we have done here with this adjustment here, I have created an editable layer. I've painted into it. I can make some of this slightly darker just by doing that, and that's just slightly, and I can go up here and I can push that just a bit there, just a tiny bit more, and you can see how much that's lightened that up. Right, I'm not going to go for a final edit here, but it's just to show you the techniques involved. So basically what we have created is a dodge and burn layer, and this one here is because it went lighter. If I double click in there, that's the dodge layer, and go in here, double click in that, and that's the burn layer. So the burn will make it darker, the dodge will make it lighter. So if I turn off the black and white, you can see the difference there already. Although I haven't taken my time with this one just to show you for the video, but we'll show you how much the image has evolved in that short time. So there is the original image, and here is the new image with more depth. So that's how you can use curves to dodge and burn. As I mentioned earlier, if you have Lumenzia or the TK panel or any other plugins like that, you can do it in there. But if you don't have them, this is one option that you can do. And that, again, coupled with the black and white, allows you to look at the image with contrast instead of colour. And there we have the two images. That's the original image we took in, that's the final image after the edit. Now you can see the difference there just by doing that. And as I say, I was using a pen and tablet to do that because I find that works a lot better and you can go right into the detail there. But hopefully that's another tip that will help you with your editing. I couldn't do this video without mentioning cropping. Now this might seem a relatively straightforward thing to think about, and that if your composition is there at the beginning, which it should be or nearly be, you're then just perhaps just a slight crop to make the image even better. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very quickly look at this image here, not the greatest of images, it's a sunset in Glencoe, not the greatest of images, but I'm going to run you through the cropping sequences for this. So as you know, in Lightroom you can get into crop here and you can see that that is the full image there. Now for me, this rock here, and you can see it was shot with the 16:35 f4, so it's quite soft at the edges. In fact, it's very soft at the edges down here. So my first option would be to take that out. So with that being said, and that one brought in there, I still want to keep this here in a relatively even keel when it comes to the image. I'd like a bit of balance through here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the sky down as well. Not too much because I don't want to crop that out. I'm not going to bother with the softness of the edges either side for now because I'd like to roll you through the different cropping aspect ratios. Now if you cycle through pressing O on your keyboard, it will take you through the crop grid overlays. Now there's quite a few here in total, so I'm just going to go through them just to show you here, and I'm just pressing O on the keyboard, and you could see that some of them are there for different aspect ratios. The grid overlay just to check for distortion, the rule of thirds as it stands, and diagonals if you're looking to bring any dynamics into an image just to make sure the diagonals work. For me, I'm going to sit with the golden section here because what I'm looking for is most of everything that's going on in my image is going on within here, here and here. As you can see, I've got quite a lot of nothing going on there, and then just at the edge near the intersection I've got the cottage, quite a lot of nothing going on here, and then I've got the bright light, and then just as a small point of interest I've got the photographer in here. So for me, that's the one that's working best. And with this as well, one thing I also like to check is I will rotate that, I'll transform it and I'll flip it horizontal. If everything still leads the way I want it to lead and nothing looks out of sorts with this, I'll be quite happy with the final edit. So I'll just take that back, and that will be transform, flip horizontal, and I'll accept that crop. Remember, you can lock it as well up here, and then if you wanted to bring it in further, once it's locked, it will keep the same aspect that you have locked that at. So I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, so this is the calibration in Lightroom, and this is the one that I recommend you use first, because this will affect your entire outcome of your image. And I'll show you an example with it as well. But what I'm going to do is hopefully briefly explain how this works. As you see, we have a red, green and blue circles here, and calibration can be found down here. So every camera is calibrated slightly differently. And what will happen is when you go into your edits, it will change different values. And if you think about, every pixel is made up of red, green and blue. We have to adjust that, and what we do with that will affect the final outcome. So as you watch here, I'm just going to go through some of these just to show you. So if I adjust the green primary, watch what happens to the rest of the colours. You can see that just that one slider affects everything else. If I go in and I just push the saturation of it, you can see it still affects it. So any small edits within here will affect your entire image overall. So if I push the blue slightly, I'll just do this like that. I'll drag some of that back, and I'll take the green over towards yellow, and I'll push the saturation of it, and I'll adjust the red, and I'll bring the saturation to there. So you can see that those small movements there, although it says plus 60, plus 31 and everything, they've affected that entire image here, or diagram should I say. If I reset them, I'll just do that, quick reset, so you can see where it is. Now let me show you that in action in an image. So here we have this image here. And if I wanted to increase the autumnal colours here, as you can tell, this is an image from last year, but if I wanted to increase the autumnal colours here, remembering that every pixel is made up with RGB, I can adjust that here before I actually start my edit. So you can see that there's nothing done here whatsoever. So if I go into calibration and I think I want to make it look slightly more autumny, so I can go in and I can push the reds. And I'll go for massive examples first just to show you. So I'm going to bring that back there, and I'm going to push the saturation of that. The greens, I am going to go to about there, and I'll push the saturation as well. So already you can see that that is beginning to change. The blues, slightly too much there. And let's push that. Right, so now I'm looking at the shadows, and remember, this will affect the image overall. It won't particularly zoom in just to your shadows. So if I take this to the green, watch the entire image. I'll move it slowly so you can see the entire image changing. If I push it over to the magenta, you'll see the image beginning to warm up to a point, but you'll also notice what happens to the bark and the trees. So we have to find a nice middle ground. Right, so from there what you can do is you can get into basic, and then that is your starting point for your edits. So from here I could go and bring the highlights back a bit. I could deepen the shadows just ever so slightly, bring the whites back slightly, blacks I'll leave where they are. If I dehaze it slightly as well, that will increase slight contrast. There we go. And exposure, I'm going to leave where it is. I'm not going to do anything else. I can push the vibrance and bring back the saturation slightly. So if I show you the before and after, that's how much of a difference that made. Right, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go back and reset the calibration while these two images are up. So you can see how this image is just now. If I go into the calibration and I reset each one of these, watch how much the image changes. So that's how much the image changes from where I wanted it to be to where it is now. So I would highly recommend the first thing that you do when you open up an image is jump into your calibration, because that's going to set the overall colour feel for your entire image. Hopefully you got something from that, and hopefully it lets you see just some of the ways to edit your images. Now I use some of these techniques, not all the time. or not all in the one edit, but I do use them. And I use them between my landscape photography, my portraiture, and also my composites. And they seem to play fairly well with every type of image. So perhaps it's something you want to look into, even trying out to see if you could use them. I mentioned in the video about Luminosity, or the TK panel, or the Pro panel as well, which I didn't mention. These panels here allow you to create luminosity masks, and what they can do with the luminosity masking is, instead of using curves to dodge and burn, you can actually use luminosity masks to do that, and I do use them a lot. I don't use the TK panels, but I know and have in the past used them. My preference now is, to be honest, Luminosity or the Pro panel, and I enjoy using them. But for now, if you want, you can try using the curves. I find that's a quick and easy way of balancing out the highlights and the shadows within your image. Yes, the shadows don't hold any luminosity, but if you're careful when you're painting, and as I said, I used a pen and tablet when I'm doing this, and that's the way I work. It's just a preferred method for myself. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, give it a thumbs up, and if you're currently not a subscriber, please consider subscribing, because that really helps the channel and helps the channel grow as well, and it allows me to get out and do more videos. And in saying that, the next video will be back out on location. I need to get outside again. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you very soon in the next video.